want to talk about is where are we?
Right now, we are sitting in what is considered historic Camp Green. We are in Regal Heights. That is this actual community. Many, many years ago, Regal Heights was a separate community from historic Camp Green, and then some changes were made where all of the homes and the neighborhoods in this immediate area from Berry Hill off of Freedom back up to really right past Camp Green were incorporated into historic Camp Green.
You were talking earlier about, there used to be a number of hundreds of people that lived over here in Columbus Park, right?
Right, that used to be Westwood Apartments, which was really lower income housing. Really, in my opinion, barracks. It was more than 640 low income units. I moved over in this area back in 2001. So you saw a very big difference between what was there then and what's there today.
A lot of people would drive by and say, "Oh wow, it's very pretty, very nicely built, looks pretty," but with that comes displacement of other people, right?
Exactly. When you think about our location, we are literally minutes from uptown Charlotte. We are minutes from the airport. We are minutes from I-85, 277, 77. We are minutes from Bank of America Stadium. So when you have this new growth where people have decided, hey, this is a great location, but they're not thinking about all the people that lived over here before, whether they were homeowners and or renters, that displacement is going to cause a lot of challenges because we're creating a false market as far as what is affordability today in housing.
Would you say, are we facing a housing affordability crisis, or are we already there?
I would say we're at the beginning stages of an affordability crisis, and we're still at the beginning, even though I think it started really around 2007, 2008. You think of the Wilmore neighborhood, the first $250,000 home that was built right on West Boulevard started to transition the wave of much more expensive housing that I don't really understand the justification, especially when we had a botched reevaluation from the county that we're still trying to recover from 2011.
When we think about affordable housing, we often think of low-income people, but along with the need for housing for people, the people who need affordable housing includes our school teachers, our firefighters, a lot of the service jobs that we rely on.
Exactly.
So where are these people going to live if they can't afford to live in these hoity-toity communities that are going up everywhere?
And that's the conversation that I've been having with city staff. I was just appointed last year as chair of housing and neighborhood development, so we've had very aggressive conversations regarding what can the city do, because we have to recognize and own the fact that government is who created concentrated poverty. It may have been with good intentions to create these units that were all 30% and below lower income, opposed to true mixed income housing where you had people who were that $7 an hour worker up to that $25, $30 an hour worker. You're not seeing that today. So the transition is the question, where do all these people go? Where did all of those who lived in Bryant Park, where did they end up? I mean, that's a prime example. You have construction trucks going down Berry Hill Road because of a development with houses that are over $300,000 directly across the street from a community that's largely rental today because of the economy and because people took advantage of that and came in and bought up the homes for $25, $30, $35, $40,000.
Let me talk to you a little bit about the city had a goal of creating 5,000 affordable housing units over a 5-year period.
Yes.
That was escalated to 3 years. A lot of this happened right after the Keith Lamont Scott shooting. There's a lot of anger, a lot of people saying, wait a minute, we were upset with gentrification, with being displaced from our communities and not having another place to go. What are your thoughts about all that?
They're absolutely right. And to be honest, the core of the letter that was created by council did not hit or answer the question of how does our officers interact specifically with minority community. So when you look at the shooting of Keith Lamont Scott, when you look at the previous shooting where you had an African American gentleman who was in a car accident and who needed assistance, but opposed to being neighborly, fear caused someone to call the police and say someone tried to break into my house, and that ended and resulted in a life being lost. That question we're still working on, and our chief is trying his best to do an amazing job to have as much transparency as possible in it. But when you look at adding on top of that the layers are not having access to quality jobs, not having access to quality affordable housing, not having a community where you can safely walk the street once the lights go out, if you want to go walking or cycling, or for children to play in the streets. All of those issues compound on top of each other, and then you add the layer of, okay, here's a perfect opportunity for us to come in, buy up all this land, and then we're going to build a completely new product that does not address the concerns of the current community.
You know, when you think of affordable housing, a lot of people have the mentality of, yeah, we need affordable housing, but I don't want it in my neighborhood.
Yes, NIMBY, not in my backyard.
So talk a little bit about how, as a city council member, how do you balance the need of having affordable housing units, but also appeasing people who are obviously very much upset with that? How do you balance that?
It's a challenge. It's a major challenge because I don't think the everyday citizen that's just trying to survive and go to work and live, they don't realize the limitations that we have in local government, and that we're a deal and rule state and we serve at the pleasure of the state. So when you have developers go to Raleigh and basically write legislation to remove all accountability, we cannot demand certain design standards. We cannot say, no, this is not a good idea to build here because our ordinances have to be written a certain way, meaning the planning department says this is what should go in this area. And as long as what you're proposing falls in that umbrella, we have limited ability to enforce what's being built. And you also don't want government to have the ability to say, no, you can't sell your land. So if you have the land, that's one conversation. But at some point, there should be a communal aspect for the development community to recognize that if I displace all these people, one, where are we going to get our workers from? Because now we move our workers out to the outskirts where we don't have public transportation.
The Sterling Observer quoted two reports from Sterling Mecklenburg Housing Partnership. She said that the larger business community would also be interested in ponying up money for affordable housing if parameters were laid out. Do you think there would be more buy-in from private developers if the city were able to lay out those rules a little bit better? Or
I definitely do. I think part of the confusion is, one, we do not have mandatory inclusionary housing. It is all voluntary. But when the city submits an RFP, prime example, Uptown Charlotte, we had 2 parcels of land that we own. We could have easily put in our RFP process stating that there has to be an affordable component and what percentage of that land needed to be affordable. We didn't do that. We missed the opportunity. We dropped the ball. I take full responsibility as one of the council members that was on council at the time that we didn't lead that conversation. You now have yet another high-end 2 units up there. You also think about the fact that we're trying to have conversations now about land trust. How can the city get access to more land so that we can lead these conversations to say if there's going to be a development, but we also need to step back. What is affordable today? I mentioned to you earlier, when I came to Charlotte in '88, I had a 470 square foot apartment that was huge that I paid around $450 a month for. You can't do that today. My mortgage is less than what people are paying in rents today for much smaller size homes, studio apartments. There has to be a different conversation, and government has a role to play in it. Even when you go back to the light rail in South End, the ULI study said, and UNC School of Government said, you know what? You can put language in to say affordability is an expectation for any development. It wasn't done. So that's also the challenge when you have elected officials on a 2-year cycle, opposed to us being on a 4-year cycle, and we make the hard decisions in order to give time for that development to come out the ground and see the benefits of it, opposed to every other year worrying about re-election, opposed to what's to the betterment of the community.
Let's talk a little bit more about those high rents, those high apartments. There are lots of apartments going up in Plaza Midwood, along South Boulevard. I mean, you go in any of these places easily, it's going to be $1,200, $1,400, $1,600, $1,800 for maybe a one bedroom.
Right.
Who can afford this?
Most people can't. If you actually go into a lot of these units, you will see 2, 3, 4 young people, millennials, living together in these units to afford the rent because of the accessibility of light rail, because of the idea of living in a certain area, but you're not seeing too many people individually that are living in these units. You're seeing a lot of people that are doubled up, or like I said, up to 4 in a unit, just so that they can say that they're living in this side of town.